I stared at the signature of my trembling hand on the last document and couldn't believe I'd finally done it. The house on Chestnut Street, $1,500,000, and it was mine. It's all mine. Congratulations, Mrs. Mallow. The realtor, Quentin Gillespie, smiled as he handed me the keys. This beautiful mansion is now officially yours. At 76, it was the first time I'd ever bought a house I'd chosen on my own. Not for my family, not for my children, not for Humphrey's convenience. It was for me. Thank you, I said, clutching the cold metal of the keys in my palm. I couldn't wait to move my things. When I left the office, I got into a cab and asked for a ride to Chestnut Street. I wanted to take another look at my new home, now as a full owner. All the way there, I remembered Humphrey laughing at my silly dreams of a Victorian mansion. Beatrix, be practical. We need a functional house, not this turret nonsense. 32 years of marriage, and every time I expressed my desires, he found a way to explain why they were unreasonable. The cabbie pulled up in front of a three-story Victorian mansion with a mansard roof and an elegant terrace. I paid and for a few minutes just stood on the sidewalk admiring my acquisition. The wrought iron fence, the manicured front yard, the carved woodwork, just the way I'd always wanted it. Humphrey died 3 years ago of a heart attack. Suddenly, just as he'd always predicted. Beatrix, I'll be gone in an instant, and you'll have to manage on your own. He left a decent insurance policy and investments, more than I expected. It turned out that my husband, for all his practicality and stinginess in everyday life, was quite prudent in financial matters. For the first year after his death, it was as if I didn't live, but existed. I continued to live in our boring, practical house in the suburbs, cooking the same scheduled meals I had done for the past 30 years, and receiving endless visits from my children to check up on me. And then, one rainy Tuesday, while sorting through old photo albums, I came across pictures from a magazine I'd cut out when I was younger. Victorian houses, just the kind I'd dreamed of before I met Humphrey. And something inside me clicked. I realized I was 75, and if not now, when? The next day, I called the realtor. Now I was standing in front of my own Victorian mansion in one of Philadelphia's finest neighborhoods. Climbing the steps, I slid the key into the lock. The door opened with a quiet creak that seemed like music to me. High ceilings, wood paneling, stained glass windows, all preserved from the 19th century, but carefully restored. I walked slowly around the first floor, a living room with a graceful marble fireplace, a dining room that could seat 12, a library with built-in bookcases to the ceiling. The kitchen was modernized, but with respect for the historic style of the house. Climbing the wide staircase, I surveyed the 4 second-floor bedrooms and the master bedroom with adjoining bathroom. The attic floor was an open space that the previous owners had used as an art studio. Huge windows filled it with light even on a cloudy day. Standing there, I suddenly cried. Not from grief, but from the realization of how many years I'd spent suppressing my desires, adjusting to other people's demands. First for Humphrey, then for the children. Prudence was born a year after we were married. A demanding child from day one, it was as if she knew what she wanted before she could even speak. Then came Oliver, quiet but stubborn. And finally Forrest, the spoiled youngest son, who got everything easier than the older ones. I loved them all, gave them all I could. But they grew up believing the world should revolve around them. Especially after Humphrey died, they felt it was their duty to take care of me. That is, to make decisions for me. When I sold the family home, the Prudences were scandalized. How could you? Our childhood, our memories are there. She failed to mention that she hadn't visited the house in months, that her own children, my grandchildren, had only been there a few times. Oliver was more pragmatic. A sensible decision, Mom. less to worry about. But why buy a new house? Why not an apartment in a nursing home? You'll be taken care of there. And Forrest just asked, what happens to the money from the sale? Like he already owned it. I didn't tell them about my plans to buy the Victorian mansion. I knew they would take it as the blather of an old woman who can't handle money. Money I'd earned by saving all my life, moonlighting as a court stenographer, even on weekends when Humphrey thought I should be home. Wiping away my tears, I walked back downstairs to the living room and sat in the chair by the fireplace. Tomorrow the movers would arrive with my things, and a new phase of my life would begin. I imagined how I would read here in the evenings, how I would plant roses in the garden behind the house, how I would have breakfast on the terrace on warm days. The ringing of my cell phone snapped me out of my reverie. Prudence's name popped up on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering it. Hi, honey. Mom, what's going on? My daughter's voice sounded strained. I called the old house and they said you moved out. Where are you? I bought a new house, I answered calmly. What? Without consulting us? The indignation in her voice was growing. Do you have any idea how irresponsible that is at your age? What house? Where? In Philadelphia, honey, on Chestnut Street. There was a long pause. Chestnut Street? That neighborhood? Mom, are you crazy? There are houses there. $1,500,000. I finished for her. Yes, that's what I paid. I could almost physically feel Prudence's breath catching. You spent $1.5 million on a house? At your age? Her voice went up an octave. Mom, it's just, I'm calling Oliver and Forrest. We'll be there tomorrow. That's it. Text me the address. She hung up before I could answer. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The storm was coming, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of it. This was my home, my life, and I wasn't going to let the kids dictate how I lived it anymore. I spent the rest of the day walking through the empty rooms, imagining where I would put the furniture, what curtains I would hang, what pictures would be on the walls. In the evening, I ordered dinner delivery from an Italian restaurant nearby and ate it sitting on the living room floor with a view of the city lights coming on in the windows. The night was spent on an air mattress I had thoughtfully brought with me. As I fell asleep in the empty house, I felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I was truly alone and not lonely. In the morning, the movers arrived with my things. There wasn't much of it, only things of personal value to me. I had sold most of the furniture from my old house along with it. I wanted to start with a clean slate, without things that reminded me of my past life. By noon, the main pieces were arranged. My bed in the master bedroom, a desk in the library, a few armchairs, and a coffee table in the living room. The rest could wait. I planned to buy new furniture gradually, choosing each piece with love and care. The movers left, and I was once again alone in the house that was slowly becoming mine. Just as I began unpacking boxes of books, the doorbell rang. Through the stained glass of the front door, I saw the silhouettes of 3 people, my children, arriving earlier than promised. Typical. I opened the door and was met with 3 pairs of eyes expressing varying degrees of shock and disapproval. Prudence, tall and thin, her hair in a tight bun, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Oliver, in his customary business suit, frowned as he surveyed the front of the house. Forrest, the youngest, seemed unable to decide whether to be angry or delighted. Mom, Prudence began in the tone she usually reserved for her subordinates. We need to have a serious talk. I smiled and stepped aside, letting them into the house. Of course, dear. Come on in. Welcome to my new home. Prudence was the first to cross the threshold, looking around the spacious hallway as if she were appraising real estate for sale, not visiting her mother. Oh my God, she breathed, tilting her head back to look at the moldings on the high ceiling. This is crazy. Oliver silently ran his finger along the wood paneling, as if testing it for authenticity. His face, always reserved, was now a mixture of surprise and irritation. Forrest, on the other hand, was delighted. Wow, Mom, it's a real mansion. You're like a heroine from those old movies you love. How many rooms are there? 7 bedrooms, 4 baths, a library, dining room, kitchen, living room, and an attic floor that I plan to turn into a painting studio, I said, not hiding my pride. Would you like a tour? Painting? Prudence finally died down. Since when have you been painting? Since I was 10, dear. I took a class in college, remember? And then, life took a different turn. And now you're going to be an artist in your 8th decade? I could hear the sarcasm in my daughter's voice. Better late than never, I countered. Come on, I'll show you the house. For the next hour, I took the children around the rooms, telling them about my plans for the house. Their faces grew darker with each room, especially when I mentioned the cost of the repairs I was going to make or the furniture I was going to order. Mom, Oliver finally broke his silence when we returned to the living room. Do you realize how much money it's going to cost to run this museum? Of course I do. I've done the math. How long will you have enough saved? For the rest of my life, Oliver, and there might even be something left over for me. At the mention of inheritance, all 3 of them visibly tensed. Prudence sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap, the posture she adopted when she was preparing for a serious conversation. Mom, we're worried about you. This house, it's too big for a single woman your age. What if you fall? What if you get sick and there's no one around? I have a phone, honey, and neighbors, and I'm thinking of getting a dog. A dog? Prudence splashed her hands. To take care of a dog. That's too much, Mom, Oliver said. Why do you need such a big house? We could find you something smaller, more comfortable. And cheaper, Forrest added, and got a warning look from Prudence. I bought exactly the house I wanted, I said firmly, and I didn't ask you to find me a place to live. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. But Mom, Prudence stepped forward, $1.5 million. Do you have any idea what you could have done with that money? I knew exactly what she meant. My children had always considered Humphrey's money, and now mine as theirs by right. Like buy a house I like? I asked with deliberate naivete. That's exactly what I did. There was a tense silence. I saw Prudence exchange meaningful glances with her brothers. I ordered dinner at a restaurant nearby, I said, changing the subject. It'll be delivered in half an hour. In the meantime, you can choose your rooms. If you're staying the night, of course. We will, Prudence said quickly. We have much to discuss. Dinner passed in a stifling atmosphere. The children barely touched their food, exchanging short phrases and meaningful glances. I ate the steak with truffle sauce with gusto, savoring every bite. Another pleasure I hadn't allowed myself for so long. Good food from expensive restaurants. How much did that dinner cost? Forrest couldn't stand it when I ordered a bottle of wine for dessert. Expensive, I answered honestly. But I can afford it. Today, yes, Oliver said. But a year from now, 2 years from now, you do realize that capital is not infinite, don't you? Oliver, honey, I was a court stenographer for 30 years, 20 of them on the state Supreme Court. I wasn't just a housewife, as you seem to think. I have a pension and savings and investments that I've been managing myself since your father passed away. Investments? Prudence almost choked on her wine. What kind of investments? A variety, mostly blue chips and bonds. Nothing exotic. From the looks on their faces, it was the first time they'd heard about this side of my life. Not surprisingly, they'd never been interested in me as a person. To them, I was just Mom, a supporting function in their own stories. Why didn't you ever talk about it? Oliver asked. Because you never asked, dear. After dinner, I apologized and went up to the bedroom, citing fatigue. But I wasn't going to sleep. I knew my kids. They wouldn't come all together for no reason. Something was brewing. Not 10 minutes later, muffled voices came from the library just below my bedroom. The old house had its secrets, including the ventilation shaft that connected the floors and conducted sounds perfectly. I quietly walked over to the grate in the floor. She's out of her mind, Prudence said. It's senile dementia, 1.5 million on a house at her age. Maybe she just decided to live for herself. Forrest's voice sounded uncertain. She'd always dreamed of a house like this. Don't be naive, Oliver cut him off. It's a classic case of cognitive decline, impulsive spending, irrational decisions. I've seen it in clients. What do you suggest? Prudence asked. We need to take control of her finances before she blows all her money. She won't agree willingly, Forrest pointed out. There are legal mechanisms, Oliver replied coldly. You could challenge her legal capacity in court. It took my breath away. My own son was talking about taking away my right to control my own life. And if it doesn't work? Prudence asked. The court proceedings could be protracted. Then we'll have to be more aggressive, Oliver said after a pause. Actual possession is 9/10 of the law. If we control the house, what do you mean? Forrest's voice sounded worried. I've brought new locks, Oliver replied. It'll take an hour, tops. It'll be ready by morning. And Mom? Forrest asked. She'll be fine, Prudence said. It's for her own good. We'll find her a nice apartment or a place in a nice retirement home, and we can sell the house. Or rent it out, Oliver added. It would bring in a steady income. To support Mom? Forrest sounded doubtful. Of course, Prudence answered quickly. And for other family needs. I stepped away from the bars, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. My own children were planning to kick me out of my home, to appropriate what I'd bought with money earned through years of labor and saving. Well, they want war. They'll get it. But not tonight. Tonight I'll pretend I didn't hear anything. I'll give them a rope to hang themselves with. I went to bed and lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds in the house fall silent. At last, there was silence. Before I fell asleep, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would let them carry out their plan. Then, I would act on my own. In the morning, I was awakened by bright sunlight. I opened my eyes and didn't immediately realize that something was wrong. Usually, I wake up at the slightest noise, but today, I slept until I looked at my watch. 9 o'clock in the morning. Hastily dressing, I went downstairs. The house was unnaturally quiet. Prudence, Oliver, Forrest? I called out, but no one answered. In the kitchen, I found a note magnetically attached to the refrigerator. Mom, we had to leave right away. We'll call you later. P. Something about it didn't feel right. It was too calm, too quiet. I walked to the front door and pulled on the handle. The door wouldn't budge. I turned the key in the lock, or tried to, because my key no longer fit the lock. They had done it after all. Changed the locks while I slept. Must have put something in my evening tea, or I would have woken up to the noise. I rushed to the back door, same story. Then to the windows, all locked from the outside. I was a prisoner in my own house. Or was I? I remembered the French doors leading from the library to the garden. The antique mechanism for locking them was more complicated than modern ones, and the children might not have known about it. They didn't. They hadn't touched those doors, and in a minute I was standing in the garden, out in the fresh air. Walking around the house, I saw what I expected to see, my suitcases, neatly arranged on the porch. Next to them was another note. Mom, we picked you up at Prudence's. Call me when you wake up. Oh? They didn't even bother to wait for me to wake up. just kicked me out of the house I'd bought with my own money and drove away, leaving a lying note. I, a 76-year-old woman, was supposed to be on the street with no money and no roof over my head, and the first thing I was supposed to do was call my caring children. I sat down on the steps of my own porch, to which I no longer had a key, and for the first time in a long time, I felt real rage. Not resentment, not disappointment, pure, sizzling rage. They didn't know who they were messing with. They had forgotten that their mother was more than just an old woman. I was a court stenographer for the state Supreme Court. I knew the judges and prosecutors. I understood how the law worked. And I had money, a lot more money than they realized. Pulling out my cell phone, I dialed a number, but not my children's. I called Victoria Hampton, my longtime friend, a former district attorney, and now a partner in one of Philadelphia's largest law firms. Vic, it's Beatrix. I'm in trouble. I need your help. The Moonlight Motel didn't live up to its romantic name. Peeling paint, a sagging mattress, and a constant odor of cigarette smoke that even the most aggressive air fresheners couldn't beat. But it was the only available place within a few miles of my house where I could check in without a reservation. I tossed my bag on the bed and looked around. In my 76 years, I didn't think I'd ever find myself in a situation like this, kicked out of my own home by the children I'd given birth to and raised. The old woman at the front desk was suspicious of my appearance without a car, with 2 suitcases and the appearance of a respectable lady. People like me don't usually stay in places like this, but the cash and 3 days advance payment smoothed her doubts. Family problems, dearie? She asked, handing me the room key. You could say that, I said, not going into details. She nodded understandingly. My ex-husband was a gift, too. But sometimes being alone isn't the worst company. I smiled weakly. If only it were as simple as a failed marriage. After Victoria's call, the first thing I did was withdraw money from the nearest ATM. Not all of it, of course. The main funds were kept in investment accounts the kids couldn't get to, but enough to last a few days until Victoria and I could work out a plan. Sitting on the edge of the creaky bed, I pondered the betrayal that still seemed unreal. Sure, my children had never been models of care and attention, but throwing my own mother out on the street, steal her house, I still couldn't believe it had happened to me. My phone was ringing off the hook with calls and texts. Prudence, Oliver, and Forrest were all wondering where I was. Apparently, they expected me to show up at Prudence's place, as the note had said. And when I didn't, they were worried that their plan hadn't gone as they'd hoped. I didn't answer. Let them worry. Let them imagine their 76-year-old mother wandering the streets in confusion and shock. In fact, I was completely calm, as if some cold, calculating mechanism had kicked in. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't going to waste energy on useless emotions. There was a knock on the door, and I flinched. Had they found me? But Victoria stood on the doorstep, elegant as ever, even in her casual clothes. "Bee," she hugged me, and only then did I feel my shoulders tense. "I brought some things, and food. Did you have lunch?" Victoria had been my friend for almost 50 years. We met when I was just starting out as a stenographer, and she was an ambitious young prosecutor. Over the years, she rose through the ranks to chief district attorney and then went into private practice, becoming one of Philadelphia's most influential attorneys. She was there for me when each of my children was born, supported me after Humphrey's death, and never refused to help. "I'm not hungry," I replied, but Victoria was already setting the containers on the table. "Eat some," she insisted. "We're going to have a serious conversation, and you need to be in shape." As I chewed mechanically on the sandwich, Victoria listened to my account of what had happened. Her face, normally impenetrable, the result of decades of courtroom work, betrayed a barely restrained indignation. So they just kicked you out of your own house? She summarized when I was done. It's not just immoral, B. It's a felony, trespassing, fraud, maybe even physical abuse if they really did slip you sleeping pills. I don't want to put my kids in jail, Vic. I sighed. I just want my house back. And you will. She nodded confidently. But first, let's see how far they're willing to go. Victoria pulled a tablet out of her bag and opened some kind of app. Do you have access to the security cameras? I shook my head. I haven't had time to install them. I just moved in. That's a shame, but that's okay. We'll get by without them. She dialed something. I ordered a cab. It'll be here in 15 minutes. Let's go see what your caring children are doing in your house. I wanted to object, but Victoria stopped me with a gesture. Don't worry, they won't see us. We're just doing some recon. The cab dropped us off a couple blocks from the house. We walked the rest of the way, and I was grateful Victoria hadn't suggested taking a shortcut. I needed time to collect my thoughts. We stopped under a spreading elm tree in front of the house. There was a great view of the front and part of the backyard, but it was hard to see us behind the thick foliage. What I saw made me gasp with indignation. On my patio, around a grill that I hadn't even had a chance to unpack, all three of my kids and several people I didn't know were bustling about, probably their spouses and children. Forrest was flipping steaks, Oliver was pouring wine, and Prudence was setting plates on a table that had obviously come from home. I hadn't bought one. They're having a barbecue, I whispered, at my house, the day after they kicked me out. Victoria squeezed my hand. Now you see who you're dealing with. This isn't just a misunderstanding or concern for your welfare, as they will surely try to portray. This is a willful appropriation of your property. I watched my children and their families enjoy spending time in my home as if it were theirs by right. They laughed, drank wine from my glasses, sat in my chairs. Not a shadow of worry on their faces. None of them even wondered where their mother was, if she was cold, hungry, or if she had a roof over her head. I want to go to them, I said firmly. Right now, I want my house back. Victoria shook her head. I don't think that's a good idea, Bee. They won't let you in, and you'll just humiliate yourself without getting anywhere. But I have to try. If you want to, she sighed. But let me stay here. If they see me, they'll realize you've asked for legal help, and they'll be more careful. I nodded, squaring my shoulders and heading across the street toward my house. With each step, my resolve only grew stronger. I wasn't going to make a scene or beg. I just wanted to see their reaction when I showed up on the doorstep of the house they'd stolen. Prudence spotted me first. She was just taking a salad dish out of the house when I came up on the porch, a look of surprise on her face that quickly changed to one of wariness. Mom, what are you doing here? Living, or tried to, until you kicked me out, I said calmly. By this time, the others had arrived. Oliver looked annoyed. Forrest looked embarrassed. Their spouses and children stood back, watching the scene unfold with awkward interest. Mom, we didn't kick you out, Oliver began in his lawyerly tone. We just thought it would be better for you to stay at the Prudences until we could find a better place. More suitable than the house I bought with my own money? A house you can't keep, Prudence retorted. And it's too big for you. And that's why you've decided to take it for yourself? To have a barbecue on my terrace while Where did you think I was supposed to be? We've been calling you all day, Forrest interjected. You didn't answer. And that didn't bother you? Made you think that maybe your elderly mother had nowhere to go after you kicked her out of her own home? They exchanged glances, and I saw in their eyes what I had feared to see, not a shadow of remorse or regret, only annoyance that I'd disrupted their plans. Mom, you're being irrational, Prudence said in the way she used to talk to her children when they were cranky. We're doing this for your own good. Let me in the house, I demanded. Now. Mom. Oliver stepped closer, as if he was going to take me by the arm and lead me away. Let's not make a scene in front of the kids. Let's go to Prudence's and talk quietly. I'm not going anywhere with you. I want to go to my own house. It's not your home anymore, Prudence said coldly. You're incapable of caring for it. You're incapable of making rational financial decisions. We've discussed it with the family lawyer, and he agrees that at your age and condition. My condition? I didn't let her finish. What is my condition, Prudence? Have you been diagnosed? Or did you and your family lawyer just decide that an old woman has no right to manage her money? Prudence's face froze, and Oliver stepped forward, blocking the entrance. Mom, you're upset and not thinking clearly. Let's go to Prudence's, get some rest, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Back off, Oliver. My voice sounded calm, but everything was boiling inside. I'm not asking you. I'm asking you. Let me into my house. I'll call the police, he said threateningly. Go ahead, I nodded. Call them. Explain to them how you changed the locks on a house that doesn't belong to you, how you threw the rightful owner out on the street, how you probably put sleeping pills in my tea. I'd love to hear it. Oliver's eyes flashed with doubt for a second, but Prudence quickly intervened. Mom, go away. You're ruining the children's day off. We'll get back to you tomorrow when you're in a better state of mind. And she slammed the door in my face. I stood on the porch of my own house, shaking with resentment and rage. Through the glass of the door, I watched the Prudences say something to the others, nod and disperse, going back to their barbecue as if nothing had happened, as if their mother hadn't just stood in front of the closed door, literally homeless. Slowly walking down the porch, I walked back to Victoria, who was waiting for me under the elm tree. I could tell by the look on her face that she had seen the whole thing. Don't say, I told you so, I asked. I wasn't going to, she said, putting her arm around my shoulders. Let's get out of here. We need to have a serious talk. We got back to my motel room, and Victoria got right down to business. Now you see who you're dealing with. They won't stop, and they won't change their minds. They want your house and your money, and they'll do anything to get it. I don't understand how my own children can do that, I whispered, still stunned by what had happened. Because they're used to thinking of everything as theirs. Because for them, you are not a person with your own desires and rights, but just an old woman who should be grateful for their care. What am I supposed to do, Vic? I felt completely helpless. You have two ways, Victoria began in a businesslike manner. The first is legal. We go to court, prove your ownership, your legal capacity, and in a few months, maybe you'll get your house back. But in that time, they can ruin a lot of things, and the process itself will be exhausting. And the second one? The second, she smiled, and there was something almost predatory in that smile. We'll give them a surprise that will make them get out of your house themselves, and we're going to do it. Say, tomorrow. What kind of surprise? The kind that will make their faces pale. Victoria pulled a folder of documents out of her bag. I had some things ready when you called, just in case. I see now that you did. We spent the next 2 hours working out a plan. Victoria called her colleagues and assistants, giving clear instructions, and I signed documents that made me wince and smile. Are you sure this is going to work? I asked when we were done. Absolutely. There's nothing scarier for people like your children than the threat of losing what they think is rightfully theirs, Victoria replied. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we have a big day ahead of us. As I fell asleep in the uncomfortable soaker bed, I thought about how my life had changed in the past few days, from a happy homeowner to a homeless woman, from a loving mother to a woman ready to teach her children a cruel lesson. But they left me no choice. Tomorrow, they'll get their surprise. And as Victoria said, their faces will indeed turn pale. The morning was surprisingly clear. The sunlight shone through the shabby curtains of the motel room, creating fanciful patterns on the faded carpet. I woke before my alarm clock with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. Victoria showed up at 8 sharp, as promised. She was in a navy blue suit, a neat folder of documents in her hand, a model of professionalism and confidence. "Good morning, Bee. Ready to get your house back?" I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. "If our plan works." "It will work," Victoria assured me. "I've checked all the legal aspects twice. Your kids think the law is on their side? Well, today they'll find out how wrong they were." While I got dressed, Victoria laid out the paperwork on the bed, double-checking every point. After years in the prosecutor's office, she knew how important details were. "It's okay," she said when I came out of the bathroom. "You look great, Bee. Strong." I tried to smile, even though I was clenching inside. The upcoming confrontation with the kids, it was excruciating despite what they'd done. Part of me still couldn't believe my own flesh and blood could do that to me. "Are you sure you want to go down this path?" Victoria asked, looking me carefully in the eye. "We can still settle this legally, though it will take longer." I shook my head. "No, they have to realize that I can't be treated like this, that I'm not a helpless old woman to be thrown out of my own home." "Then let's go. They're waiting for us." There were 2 cars waiting for us outside the motel. In the first was a short man with a neat mustache who introduced himself as Deputy Edward Tate. In the second were 2 young men in smart suits, lawyers from Victoria's firm. "All set, ma'am," the deputy said, turning to me. Ms. Hampton explained the situation. "We have the authority to forcibly return you to your home because there is clear evidence of trespassing and changing the locks." I nodded, grateful for his involvement. The role of the lawman was key in our plan. The kids could ignore me, but not an official with a warrant. The drive home took only 15 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity to me. I imagined the children's surprised faces, their outrage, their attempts to justify themselves. And somewhere deep inside, I hoped, naively, I knew it, that maybe they would repent, realize how much pain they had caused me. As our little procession stopped outside my Victorian mansion, neighbors began to peer furtively out the windows. It wasn't every day that a sheriff's car, accompanied by 2 black executive sedans, showed up on quiet Chestnut Street. "Stay here," Victoria said as I reached for the doorknob. "Let the sheriff do his part first." I obediently leaned back in my seat, watching Deputy Tate walk up to the porch and ring the doorbell with determination. A minute passed, another. Finally, the door opened, and Forrest's sleepy figure appeared in the doorway. Apparently, my kids had decided to have a real family vacation at my house for the weekend. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could tell from Forrest's abrupt gestures and the deputy's stiff posture that the conversation was intense. A few minutes later, Prudence and Oliver joined them, both in house clothes, clearly disturbed by the early visit. Victoria turned to me. "It's time, Bee. Let's go." Victoria, the 2 lawyers, and I walked up to the porch where the tense scene was unfolding. "This is private property." Oliver was outraged. "You have no right to trespass without a warrant." "I have a warrant, Mr. Mallow," the deputy replied calmly, holding out the document. "And if you read the deed to the house carefully, you'll see that the legal owner is your mother, Beatrix Mallow, who, by the way, is standing right behind you." All 3 of them turned around at the same time. Their faces showed a range of emotions, from surprise to vexation. "Mama!" Prudence exclaimed with feigned joy. "We were so worried. Where have you been?" "Worried?" My voice sounded surprisingly calm. "So worried that you kept barbecuing on my terrace?" "Mom, we can explain," Oliver began, but the deputy interrupted him. "I'm sorry, But we have an official procedure. Mr. and Miss Mallow, you have trespassed and changed the locks without the owner's consent. This is a serious offense. I must demand that you return the keys and leave the premises immediately. It's a misunderstanding. Oliver tried to intervene. Our mother is unwell and needs to be looked after. We were only acting in her best interests. I'm perfectly healthy, I said firmly. The only thing I need is for you to get out of my house. Mom, please. Prudence took a step toward me. Let's not make a scene. The neighbors are watching. We'll all go inside and talk quietly about. There's nothing to discuss, Victoria said, stepping forward. Mrs. Mallow has hired me as her attorney, and I'm officially notifying you that if you don't vacate the premises voluntarily, we will be forced to use the police. You hired an attorney? Oliver looked at me in disbelief. Against your own children? Did I have a choice? I answered the question with a question. After you threw me out of my house? We didn't throw you out. Prudence was outraged. We left a note saying you could stay with me. Generous, I said dryly, especially after they changed the locks on a house I paid $1,500,000 for. At the mention of the sum, Prudence's face contorted as if in pain. Money was what they really cared about. This is crazy, Forrest muttered, shifting his gaze from me to the deputy. We just wanted to help. You can help now by vacating the house, the deputy said firmly. I have the authority to use force if necessary. There was a look of confusion on my children's faces. Obviously, they hadn't expected this turn of events. They thought I was going to beg for mercy or accept their concern without complaint. Okay, Oliver said finally. We'll go. But this isn't over, Mom. We'll go to court. We'll prove you're incompetent. Actually, Victoria interjected, there's something else you should know. Mrs. Mallow has prepared some documents that you should read before you take any legal action. She nodded to the two young lawyers, and one of them handed Oliver a folder of documents. What are these? He asked suspiciously. Read it, Victoria offered. I think you'll find it interesting. We all went into the living room, my living room, with its high ceilings and marble fireplace. I noted with pain that the kids had already made changes. They'd rearranged the furniture, added some of their own things, as if marking territory. Oliver opened the folder and began to read. As he read, his face changed from disbelief to shock, then to fury. What's in it? Prudence asked impatiently, peering over his shoulder. Oliver looked up at me. You couldn't have done that. But I did, I replied calmly. What the hell is in there? Forrest snatched the documents from his brother and ran his eyes over them quickly. A museum? You bequeathed your house to the city for a museum? If something happens to me or I'm forcibly removed from my home, I confirmed. An amendment to my will, notarized yesterday. You can't. Prudence snatched the papers from Forrest, her hands shaking. This is our inheritance. It was yours, I corrected, until you showed your true feelings for me. Mom, you don't know what you're doing. Oliver tried to pull himself together, to return to his lawyerly tone. This is an impulsive decision, made under stress. Any court would invalidate it. I don't think so, Victoria interjected. The amendment is perfectly drafted. Besides, it's not the only document your mother signed. She nodded to the second lawyer, who pulled out another folder. What's this? Oliver asked, clearly afraid. Endowments, Victoria answered, on all of Mrs. Mallow's other assets, investment accounts, securities, bank deposits, all to be managed by a charitable foundation for elderly artists, provided Mrs. Mallow can enjoy the proceeds for the rest of her life. There was dead silence in the room. My children's faces turned pale, as if they had seen a ghost. Prudence was the first to break the silence. You disinherited us? All of it? Because of one misunderstanding? A misunderstanding? I felt my anger rising in me. You threw me out of my house. You changed the locks while I was sleeping. You left my things on the porch. That's not a misunderstanding, Prudence. It's a betrayal. We did it for you, she exclaimed, but her voice sounded false, even to herself. No, I shook my head. You did it for the money, for this house. You never thought about me, just what I could give you. That's not true, Forrest said quietly, but I could see in his eyes that he knew I was right. You can challenge these documents in court, Victoria continued. But be warned, the trial will be public. All the details of how you treated your mother will become public. Are you ready for that? Especially given your, professional reputation? That last argument hit the mark. Oliver as a lawyer, Prudence as an accountant. They couldn't afford a public scandal. It's blackmail, Oliver hissed. It's a consequence, Victoria corrected him, of your own actions. And now what? Forrest asked after a long pause. Now you pack your things and get out of my house, I said calmly. And if you have any conscience at all, you'll think about what you've done. Prudence made a sound like a sob, but I didn't see tears in her eyes, just anger and frustration. You're going to regret this, Mom, she said quietly, when you're all alone in this big, empty house, when there's no one to take care of you. I prefer loneliness to your taking care, I replied. At least it's more honest. The next half hour passed in tense silence, broken only by the sounds of hurried packing. Under the sheriff's deputy's supervision, my children gathered their belongings, which they had already organized into cabinets and drawers. They avoided making eye contact with me, speaking to each other in short, curt phrases. Victoria stood beside me, her presence giving me strength. Without her, I might have trembled. Despite everything they'd done, these men were my children, flesh of my flesh. Finally, the packing was finished. The deputy escorted them to the door, politely but firmly signaling that their presence was no longer required. Oliver turned at the door. You're being rash, Mom. When you come to your senses, call me. Prudence didn't even look in my direction, her back showing the depths of hurt dignity. Only Forrest lingered a moment. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't think it would turn out this way. And they left. I stood in the doorway of my house again, and watched the three figures get into Oliver's car and drive away, leaving a puff of exhaust behind them. Are you okay, ma'am? The deputy asked with genuine concern. Yes, I answered, though I felt empty inside. Thank you for your help. You're welcome if you need anything. He handed me his card. And I suggest you change the locks. Again. When everyone left, Victoria and I were alone in the huge living room. I sank slowly into a chair, feeling suddenly weak. You did it, Bee, Victoria said softly, sitting down next to me. They're gone. Yes, I nodded. They're gone. Do you really want to keep the deeds of gift? She asked after a pause. We drew them up as leverage, but you don't have to. I will, I replied firmly. After what they've done, I don't want them to get anything from me. Let the money go to those who really need it. Victoria looked at me carefully. Are you sure? They're your children, Bee. No matter what. I thought about it. Images flashed before my eyes. Prudence when she was little, holding my hand trustingly. Oliver proudly showing off his first school project. Forrest falling asleep on my lap after a long day. But then those images were replaced by others. The cold, calculating faces of grown men planning to kick me out of my own house, talking about my cognitive decline, dividing up my possessions as if I were already dead. I'm sure, I said, feeling oddly relieved. They'd made their choice. Now I'm making mine. Victoria nodded and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Bee. You're stronger than you think. I looked across the empty living room, listening to the silence of the house. There was a new life ahead of me, without my children, but with a new freedom. And despite the pain of loss, I was ready to begin it. It had been a week since my children had left my home. 7 days of absolute silence, broken only by my own footsteps on the creaky floorboards and the antique clock in the hall, chiming away with a melodic chime. I savored this silence as I had never enjoyed it before. The first thing I did was change all the locks, this time installing a modern security system with a code lock and CCTV cameras. The locksmith, an elderly man with a good-natured smile, also recommended motion sensors and a direct link to the security company. Living alone in a house this big, ma'am? It's better to be safe. I agreed, even though I knew my children were unlikely to try to break into the house again. Victoria had done her best to make them realize the legal consequences, but the feeling of security was worth it. I spent the next few days setting up the house. The Victorian mansion was gradually filled with things that reflected my taste rather than Humphrey's practical considerations or the children's expectations. I ordered antique furniture that matched the style of the house, hung paintings on the walls that I had always wanted to buy, but had hesitated while I was married. In the attic, I set up an art studio. Large windows filled the space with light, perfect for painting. I bought an easel, canvases, paints, everything I'd dreamed of for decades. My first painting was as clumsy as a child's, but I experienced such pleasure in the process that it didn't matter. I had time to improve. Victoria came by a few times, helping with the legal formalities of setting up a charitable foundation. We decided that the foundation would support older artists who started their creative journey late, like me. Have you thought about who you're going to put on the board of trustees? She asked when we were sitting over tea in my new dining room. You, first of all, I answered, and a few other people I trust, but definitely not my children. Victoria nodded understandingly, not trying to dissuade me. She could see that the wound was still fresh, despite my outward optimism. On the 10th day, the first call came. Forrest. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. Mom? His voice sounded unsure. How are you? Fine, I answered dryly. To what do I owe the call? I just, wanted to see how you were doing, see if you needed any help. Thanks, but I'm doing fine on my own. I always have. There was an awkward pause. I could hear his breathing in the phone and imagine him picking out his words, probably rehearsed in advance. Mom, I want to apologize, he finally said. I shouldn't have gotten involved in this. It was Prudence and Oliver who insisted. And you were just obeying their instructions? I interrupted. How convenient to pass the buck, Forrest. No, he stammered. I'm as much to blame as they are, but I'm really sorry, and I want to make it right. Something in his voice made me wary. The apology sounded too smooth, the words too well chosen. It was as if the speech had been written in advance. Probably by Oliver. He was always the master of the persuasive argument. How exactly do you propose we fix this? I asked, wanting to test my suspicions. Well, we could start with a family dinner. Talk like we used to. I'm sure we can come to a compromise about everything. There it is. Compromise. Code word for we want our inheritance back. About what exactly, Forrest? I kept checking. Those documents you signed, the deed of gift. You may have overreacted. After all, we're your family and, oh, so that's what this is about. I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. It's not that you threw me out of my house. It's not about you treating me like I'm out of my mind. It's about the money. It's always been about money. Mama, it ain't fair. No, Forrest, it ain't fair what you did to me. Goodbye. I hung up the phone and felt my hands shaking. Part of me hoped that at least my youngest son was truly sorry for what had happened. but he turned out to be just like the others. Prudence was the next to call. Unlike Forrest, she didn't even try to feign remorse. Mom, this is ridiculous, she began without preamble. You can't just cut us off from our inheritance because of one misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is forgetting to buy milk, Prudence, I replied. What you have done is treason. We were acting in your best interests. Her voice rose an octave. This house is too big for you. You can't handle it alone. I wonder, I said, if the house is too big for me alone, why didn't you offer to let me live in it with you? Instead, you put me out on the street and made yourself comfortable. It was a temporary solution until we could find something more suitable for you. Suitable for who, Prudence? For me or for you? I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. You know what the saddest part is? You don't even realize what you've done wrong. You still think you have the right to decide for me. Because we're your children. We care about you. No, Prudence, you care about my money. Prudence took a sharp breath, clearly preparing for another tirade, but I didn't give her the chance. I'm not changing my mind. The house will remain to the city after I die, and the rest of the property will go to a charitable foundation. If you're so concerned about my well-being, you're welcome to visit me, but not for money. Is that your last word? Her voice turned icy. Yes. Well, you'll regret it when you're all alone. After that conversation, I sat in the chair by the fireplace for a long time, staring at the fire. There was an emptiness inside, not from loneliness, but from the realization that I had never really known my children. Or maybe I didn't want to know them. I'd turned a blind eye to their selfishness, justified their actions like all mothers do. Oliver called last, a few days later. His approach was the most sophisticated. He appealed to the law and my rationality. Mom, I understand your frustration, he began in his professional tone. But these deeds of gift, they can be challenged in court. You signed them under emotional distress, under pressure from your lawyer. Victoria's been my friend for 50 years, I reminded him, and she'd never pressured me. Still, the decision was rushed, and I think deep down inside, you realize that. What I do realize, Oliver, is that you're trying to manipulate me. Lawyer to lawyer, these documents are impeccable, and I was of sound mind when I signed them. Any court of law will attest to that. Mom, his voice softened, almost pleading. We're your children, your flesh and blood. Do you really want everything you and your father have gained to go to strangers? Better strangers who need it than family who threw me out on the street for money. You're exaggerating. We never. Oliver, I interrupted him. I'm 76 years old. I'm too old to play games. I heard you talking in the library. I know what you were planning to do to me and to my house, and I will never forget it. There was silence on the other end of the line. Did you hurt us? He finally spoke. Every word, I confirmed, about my cognitive decline, about how you were planning to sell the house or rent it out, about the family needs the money would be used for. Silence again, then a deep sigh. Mom, we overreacted. We said something we didn't mean. No, Oliver, you meant exactly what you said. And you know what? I'm grateful to you. You opened my eyes, showed me who you really are. Now I can move on with my life without illusions. What do you mean? I don't want to see you anymore. None of you. Not now, not ever again. Mom, you can't. I can, Oliver, and I'm doing it. Goodbye. I hung up the phone and turned it off. I felt heavy, but at the same time, suddenly light, as if I'd shed a weight I'd been carrying my whole life. A weight of expectations, of obligation, of guilt. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I went over the events of the last few weeks, trying to understand how my own children could have done such a cruel thing to me. Maybe it was my own fault, spoiled them, failed to teach them to respect others? Or was it Humphrey, who always put material values before emotional ones? I woke up this morning with a clear head and a firm decision. I couldn't change the past or remake my children, but I could control my future, and it started today. I called Victoria and asked her to come over. When she showed up, I had already made breakfast and even worked on a new painting in the studio. "You look refreshed," she said, studying my face. "I am," I nodded. "I've made my decision, Vic. A final one." I told her about the kids' calls and my decision to cut ties with them completely. "Are you sure?" Victoria asked after a long pause. "It's a big step." "I'm absolutely sure," I replied. "They've shown their true colors, and it's not just about the house or the money. It's about attitude. It's that they don't see me as a person, just an old woman who needs their care and a purse to draw from." "It's a tough decision, Bee," Victoria said softly, "but I won't discourage you. You deserve respect and peace." "Thank you." I squeezed her hand. "I need your help with one more document. I want to make a formal statement to the children that I no longer wish to have contact with them, and also instructions for my funeral. I don't want them present." Victoria sighed but nodded. "All right, but let's have tea first. Decisions like this are not made in haste." We were sitting on the terrace, the same terrace where my children had recently had a barbecue, as if they'd already buried me. The sun was warming, the birds were singing in the garden, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. "You know, Vic," I said, looking at the blooming rose bushes I'd recently planted, "I've lived my whole life for others, for Humphrey, for the kids, adjusting, giving in, sacrificing my own desires, and look where it's gotten me." "Don't blame yourself," Victoria shook her head. "You were a good mother and wife." "Maybe," I agreed, "but I wasn't me, until now. And you know what? I like being me. I like living in the house I chose, painting pictures that may never be masterpieces, waking up and deciding how to spend my day without looking back at other people's expectations." Victoria smiled. "I'm happy for you, Bee. I'm really happy for you." We spent the afternoon drafting paperwork. The formal statement of no contact with the children was short but comprehensive. I indicated that I no longer wanted to see or speak to them, that all attempts to contact me must be made through my attorney, and that this decision was final. When Victoria left, I sat in my new library for a long time, pondering my decision. It was painful to cut ties with my own children, but it would hurt even more to continue a relationship built on lies and self-interest. I pulled out an old photo album, the only thing I'd taken from the family home for sentimental reasons. The pictures showed Prudence, Oliver, and Forrest as children smiling, innocent, loving. They were like that once upon a time. Or did I just want to see them like that? Closing the album, I tucked it away in the far closet. The past would stay in the past. And the future belonged to me, only me. The next day, I sent 3 envelopes by Courier 1 to each of my children. Official notification that I was ending my relationship with them. A hard decision, but the only right one. When the courier left, I went up to my loft studio, set a new canvas on my easel, and began painting. Not a house, not a landscape, not a still life. I painted myself as I saw myself now, strong, independent, free of the past. It was the first portrait of my new life. 6 months flew by. Spring changed to summer, summer to fall, and now the October wind was whirling the fallen leaves in the garden of my Victorian mansion. I stood at the attic window, watching Edward the gardener gather the leaves into neat piles. I had a cup of hot tea in my hand, and a new painting was drying on the easel behind me, a landscape of my garden in autumn colors. During these 6 months, the house had been completely transformed to reflect my tastes and preferences. I replaced heavy curtains with light curtains, allowing sunlight to flood the rooms. I ordered comfortable but elegant armchairs and sofas and placed fresh flowers and plants everywhere. I turned one of the guest bedrooms into a library with comfortable reading chairs and a collection of books I'd always wanted to read but never had the time. The garden has changed too. I hired Edward, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and marvelous hands that turn any piece of land into a blooming paradise. Together we planned a rose garden, an alpine slide, and a small lily pond. Working in the garden gave me a special pleasure. I could spend hours tending to the plants, feeling the earth nourish not only them, but me as well. The first weeks after the separation from my children were the hardest. Despite everything that had happened, my motherly heart ached. I caught myself reaching for the phone to call Prudence and ask how the grandchildren were doing, or looking at the menu of a new restaurant and thinking that Forrest would love the place, but then remembering the coldness in their eyes when they stood on my porch and said it was not my house anymore. Victoria was there for me during those difficult days. She stopped by almost every evening after work, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just for a cup of tea. We talked about everything: books, politics, her work, my painting, but never about my children. She understood that this wound had not yet healed, and she did not nurse it. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace with glasses of wine, Victoria suggested, "B, have you thought about joining an art club? There's a lovely studio downtown where amateur artists gather. Mostly people of our age, no pretensions to professionalism, just the pleasure of creating and socializing." I hesitated. After everything that had happened, I was comfortable in my little world: the house, the garden, with occasional visits from Victoria. The thought of new acquaintances, of having to explain who I was and where I was from, was unsettling. "I don't know, Vic," I said. "I'm not particularly sociable." "That's why you should try," she insisted softly. "B, you can't spend the rest of your life locked in four walls, even if they are the walls of a magnificent Victorian mansion." I knew she was right, so the next week, overcoming my inner resistance, I went to my first class. The studio was in an old factory building that had been converted into creative studios. High ceilings, huge windows, wooden floors, everything breathed creative freedom. I was nervous to enter the room, where about 10 people of various ages, but mostly elderly, were already gathered. "There's our new member," exclaimed the studio manager, Eleanor Greenwood, an artist with a mop of gray hair gathered in a careless bun. "Beatrix, right? Victoria's told me so much about you. Come in, choose any easel you like." To my surprise, I felt at home almost immediately. No one asked awkward questions about family or background. Everyone was passionate about art, sharing tips, talking about their projects. After the class, we went to a nearby cafe, and I found myself in the middle of a lively conversation about various watercolor techniques. "You know, Grace, a 72-year-old former English teacher, told me, I didn't start painting until I was 65. Before that, I had never even held a pencil. Now, I can't imagine life without it." "And how did you decide to start?" I asked, feeling a strange affinity with this woman. "I was widowed," she replied simply. "My husband died. My children were separated. I sat at home and felt that life was over. And then a neighbor dragged me to a master class in painting. It was like a new world opened up." I nodded, understanding her like no one else. From that day on, the art studio became an integral part of my life. I went twice a week, and gradually the people I met there turned from casual acquaintances to friends. There was Grace, with her quiet wisdom and unexpected sense of humor. Edwin, an octogenarian former accountant who painted birds exclusively and knew everything about them. Miriam, an energetic widow in her 70s who had traveled halfway around the world after her husband's death and now painted from photographs from her travels, and, of course, Eleanor herself, talented, eccentric, always ready to support and guide. In October, the studio organized a small exhibition of its members' works in a local gallery. To my amazement, Eleanor included 3 of my paintings: a garden landscape, a still life with fall fruits, and, most importantly, my self-portrait, which I painted in the first days after the separation from my children. "It's strong," Eleanor said, when I expressed my doubts about whether it was worthy of an exhibition. "It has a sense of history, pain, but also strength. People need to see it." I was as nervous as a teenager at the exhibition opening, but the support of my friends helped me cope with the excitement. To my surprise, my work attracted interest, especially the self-portrait. An elderly gentleman in an elegant suit stood in front of it for a long time and then approached me. "Are you Beatrix Mallow, the author of this portrait?" he asked in a slight British accent. "Yes, I am," I replied, preparing myself for polite criticism. "It's an amazing piece of work," he said with genuine admiration. "There's so much truth. I'm Edmund Hollingsworth, curator of a small gallery on Pine Street. We specialize in older artists. Would you be interested in exhibiting a series of works?" I was so stunned I could barely speak. Victoria, who was standing next to me, came to the rescue. "Ms. Mallow will consider your offer, Mr. Hollingsworth. May I have your contact information?" That offer was a turning point. I'd never thought of myself as a real artist. Painting was just a way to express emotion, to occupy my time. But now, having been recognized by a professional, I started to take my art more seriously. For the next few months, I worked on a series of paintings for Hollingsworth Gallery. They weren't just landscapes or still lifes. I was painting the story of my life: the house I grew up in, the school I went to, the courthouse where I worked for 30 years, Humphrey as a young man, from an old photograph, and finally, my Victorian mansion, a symbol of my late but true freedom. Working on these paintings was a kind of therapy. I was living my life anew, but now from a position of strength rather than a victim of circumstance. I was seeing patterns I had not noticed before, realizing how one event led to another, shaping me into the person I am today. In addition to painting, I found other hobbies. I joined a book club at the local library where we discussed classic and contemporary literature. I started attending classical music concerts at the Philharmonic, sometimes in the company of Grace or Miriam, sometimes alone. I also started doing charity work, not just donating money through the foundation I had set up, but also personally participating in projects. Once a week, I gave drawing lessons to the elderly in a nursing home. These classes brought a special satisfaction: to see people's eyes light up, many of whom had already lost interest in life. On my 77th birthday, Victoria organized a surprise small party at my home. When I returned from my morning walk, the living room was decorated with flowers and balloons, and my new friends, Grace, Edwin, Miriam, Eleanor, Edmund Hollingsworth, and even Edward the gardener and his wife, were gathered around the table. "Surprise!" they shouted, and I felt tears come to my eyes. It was the best birthday party of my life. No strained smiles, no tension, no gifts chosen by my son's or daughter's secretary at the last minute. Just sincere joy, warm hugs, and gifts that were heartfelt. Grace gave me a vintage leather-bound sketchbook, Edwin a set of handmade Japanese brushes, Miriam a silk scarf brought back from a recent trip to India, Eleanor a rare book on the history of Impressionism, Edmund an invitation to a private exhibition at an art museum, Edward and his wife a basket of rare rose seedlings for my garden, and Victoria. Victoria had a very special gift. She handed me an envelope, and when I opened it, I didn't immediately realize what was in it. It's the paperwork for the Beatrix Mallow Fellowship, she explained. It's for older artists who started their artistic endeavors after the age of 60. The funding will come from your foundation, but I've added my share. I couldn't hold back the tears. It was the perfect embodiment of everything I had dreamed of, supporting people who, like me, have decided to start a new life at an age when many people are already putting a cross on themselves. After the party, when the guests had gone, Victoria and I sat on the terrace, wrapped in plaids. The October evening was chilly. The stars shone in the darkening sky, and the scent of late roses wafted from the garden. Are you happy, Bee? Victoria asked, looking at me carefully. I wondered. 6 months ago, it had seemed to me that my life was ruined, that the betrayal of my children was the end of everything, that I was doomed to grow old alone in an empty, albeit beautiful, house. And now my home is filled with life and creativity. I have friends who appreciate me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I have goals, hobbies, plans for the future. I no longer exist in the shadow of my husband or as a mother. I live my life fully as Beatrix Mallow, artist, philanthropist, friend. Yes, I answered, and it was pure truth. I am happy. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I am truly happy. And your children? Victoria asked cautiously. Do you still think about them? Sometimes, I admitted. They're part of my life, part of me. I can't just erase them from my mind, but I don't feel pain when I think about them anymore. Just, regret that they couldn't see me as a person, not just a mother or a purse. Did they try to contact you? Forrest called a couple times, I sighed. But I didn't answer, and he stopped. Prudence and Oliver didn't even try. I guess they're still mad about the inheritance. Do you regret the decision to end the relationship? I shook my head. No, it was the right decision. You can't build a relationship on lies and manipulation, even with your own children, especially with your own children. Victoria nodded understandingly and poured us both some wine. To you, Bee, she raised her glass. To your new life. To all of us, I smiled, toasting her. To the real family we choose for ourselves. That night, lying in my bedroom with its high ceilings and vintage furniture, I thought about the path I'd traveled over the past year. From a dutiful wife and mother, used to always putting the needs of others before her own, to an independent woman living life on her own terms. It has not been an easy road, with pain and loss, but it led me to where I was always meant to be, to myself, to my authentic self that had been buried under layers of other people's expectations for so long. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Perhaps a new painting, or a meeting with an interesting person, or just quiet hours in the garden among my roses. And it was wonderful not to know for sure, but to be open to all possibilities. As I fell asleep, I smiled. At 77, my life was not ending. It was just beginning. And it was the most beautiful of all possible late life freedoms.